there are clues. Vital evidence that points to who the killer is and how they killed.
It wasn't a normal crime scene.
Forensics were crucial.
Every contact leaves a trace.
It's down to detectives, crime scene investigators, and forensic experts to piece those clues together.
It's like trying to do a jigsaw when you haven't got the picture on the box.
Using cutting-edge techniques and the power of science.
His jeans had the profile of the crime scene on them. I know that he had knelt down on the soil.
To convict the killers.
We've got to find him and catch him.
He's probably the most dangerous person I've prosecuted.
And bring justice to the victims.
She's never, ever coming home.
She'll never be forgotten, ever.
In this episode, a woman is attacked and murdered in the middle of Suburbia.
People in the area were visibly shocked.
By a killer who spent a night hunting for victims.
What's striking about this attack is the sheer brutality of it.
And who left one tiny piece of evidence.
From an investigative point of view, you can't get any better evidence.
This is Forensics, Catching the Killer.
I was off duty. I realised I had about 6 missed calls and they were all from work. I was then told that a young female had been attacked, quite a brutal assault. This area itself is a quiet residential area, and at the time it would still have had people walking up and down the road, going about their business, people driving. It's a suburban street, nothing special. Nothing different really from this street, from any other quiet residential street. It's just a nice area. The incident happens about 2:20 in the morning, Sunday morning. It was in Cranbrook Road, which we can see here. You can see the traffic up and down, and across the other side of the road, White House with some white balustrade is where the actual attack happened. The victim was found by members of the public. They found her lying in the front garden, clearly being assaulted, and her clothes in disarray.
The young woman was 35-year-old Zara Alina. She was taken to the Royal London Hospital on the 26th of June, 2022, but died from her horrific injuries just a few hours later. Detective Chief Inspector Dave Wellams from the Met Police's Major Investigation Team was put in charge of the investigation.
As the Senior Investigating Officer, I identify a number of strands within the investigation, be they CCTV, be they forensic, be they house-to-house witnesses. So in this case, we don't know anything really. So the forensics are a huge priority. We had crime scene managers assess the scene. We had forensic retrieval taking place. It's very, very important we identify our victim. We want to identify our suspect, because will he strike again? And that is in the back of your mind. Will he strike again?
This was a shocking attack in a usually peaceful part of London. Ashna Hurinag is a TV reporter who covered the story.
Ilford is a really busy, diverse part of London, both in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds, but also in terms of race, religion. It's a bit of a melting pot. Loads and loads of families, but specifically, and I suppose key to this, is it's a really generally quite safe place to live. Zara Alina was a young woman in her 30s, had grown up in Ilford. These were the streets that she knew so well. She was an aspiring lawyer, a recent law graduate. She had been doing an internship at the Royal Courts of Justice. This was somebody who cared about law, order and justice. And we understood that she was a woman that was constantly giving back to her community. She volunteered in soup kitchens. That's something that very few people do. Someone who actively gives back, who volunteers. And she was, from what we understand from her family, an integral part of her family unit. Loved so incredibly dearly, and someone they looked to as a pillar.
Zara was last seen by her family on the Saturday. Later that evening, she went to meet a friend.
Zara and her friend have been in Champs Wine Bar Club, and they leave there about 2 o'clock. Her friend gets a taxi. Zara decides that she's going to walk, and she walks along Cranbrook, and it's a long, long road.
She only lived 15 minutes away, so she would just walk. It's fine. I'll just walk home. I do it all the time. It's a road that I know really well. It's in the early hours, but there are cabs everywhere. There's buses still running, and people had been out drinking, had been in the local bars, and there are plenty of greengrocers and supermarkets that are open really late at night in that area. She proceeded to walk up the streets with her tote bag on her shoulder and started walking home.
It was a 2-mile walk home, which Zara had made many times before, but this night was to be the last. She got as far as halfway down Cranbrook Road, 10 minutes away from her home.
Some people heard the attack going on, didn't realise what it was at the time, thought it was somebody arguing, maybe someone urinating. Witnesses were saying that there was some man stamping, which is why one of them thought the person was breaking up some cardboard boxes and he was just compressing them to put in a bin. They weren't aware of what was happening. Subsequently, they wandered over, they passed where Zara was lying, and they found her. They tried to give first aid. They called 999, paramedics down, and they took it over from there.
Zara was found to have sustained 46 separate injuries. She'd been stamped on, strangled, sexually assaulted, and beaten. The forensic pathologist eventually concluded that her death was caused by traumatic brain injuries and neck compression. The driveway where she had been found became a crime scene and was cordoned off. Andrew Langley is a veteran crime scene manager, formerly for the Metropolitan Police.
At this scene, the focus is all on where Zara has been found. But at that stage, you don't know what's happened. It's dangerous to assume that this is the entirety of your scene, because you have to bear in mind that the initial contact may have been somewhere else. There may have been an interaction between people several streets away. You just don't know at that stage. So you have to keep your mind open that this is where the scene's ended. Where did it start? With a scene like Zara's, it's vital that you record everything. Photography, making sure that you capture everything before you start to disturb the scene.
And more evidence was to be found, not just on the driveway where Zara had been discovered, but further along the street as well. These clues, Zara's clothes and various possessions, suggested the route which the attacker might have taken to get away.
So the location of Zara's clothing and possessions enable you to start to build some understanding around what's gone on. You start to build a picture of quite a chaotic incident.
He's taken property from Zara. He's taken items of clothing from her. He's taken her mobile phone. He's taken her purse. And as he's heading back along Cranbrook Road, he's discarding these. He'll throw her leggings into one garden. He'll throw her purse into a bush. He's thrown a mobile phone into another garden. And they're all very haphazard.
But it wasn't just Zara's personal belongings which the attacker left behind. Forensic investigators found one more piece of crucial evidence.
We had a fingerprint in blood at the scene. It was left on a low wall, like a balustrade, and it's on brickwork. And it's not the best surface, but it still gave ridge detail, and that was vital. That was a main priority at that time.
Could this one finger mark lead detectives to a match and the positive identification of Zara's killer? Ilford, London, in June 2022. 35-year-old Zara Alina had been brutally attacked on a private driveway on a suburban street after a night out with a friend. She was just 10 minutes from her home. Zara died from her injuries shortly afterwards in hospital. As police work continued, the local community awoke the next morning to the shocking news of her death.
People in the area were quite visibly shocked. There was a lot of distress, particularly because this is a residential area. There are families around, and this sort of thing really never happens. And it was such an unusual situation. A young woman's body had been found in a driveway, and that's terrifying to people that live in that local area.
I've got 2 daughters, and it could happen to anyone. It's just really, really sad.
The police wanted information, and therefore they were being quite open with what they needed from the press and what they needed from the public, because at that stage they had no idea why this young woman had been killed.
It is crucial that anyone with information comes forward to the police or calls Crime Stoppers anonymously in order to help catch whoever is responsible for this truly shocking act of violence.
Zara's death was the latest in a number of high-profile cases of women being randomly attacked and murdered by strangers.
There is an epidemic of violence against women and girls. When is this going to end?
The conversation and the awareness of violence against women and girls was heightened at this time. People were talking about the deaths of Sarah Everard, the murders of Nicole Smallman, Bieber Henry and Sabina Nessa. There was a deep sense of mourning, sorrow, anger. Why is this being allowed to continue in such a way? Why is nobody doing something about it? An incredible sense of frustration that had just been building.
Stop saying the same thing. She could see her home almost, and she couldn't walk there. So she is not responsible for what happened to her. He is responsible for what happened to her.
But while the public rage and the debates continued, Detective Chief Inspector Dave Wellams was focusing his attention on a tiny bloodied finger mark. The blood, tragically, was Zara's, but its presence was vital for the investigation.
The retrieval of the bloodied fingerprint is crucial to us. Blood will only be wet for a very short period of time, it dries, and then there won't be any fingerprint. However, in this case, after the attack, during the attack, he steadies himself on this wall, this low balustrade, and his fingerprints have gone onto the brickwork after he's attacked Zara and have left his fingerprints in her blood.
We had these white painted balustrades in the front garden. That's unusual. I can't think of many instances where I've come across that, but that enabled the finger marks in blood to be seen. If it had just been bare brick, pebble dash, very unlikely that you'd be able to recover finger marks in blood from that location.
This one solitary finger mark would need in-depth analysis. but it had been left in blood and outside on the driveway where Zara was attacked. So forensic investigators knew it was at risk from the elements and that they needed to capture it in detail.
They're going to be recovered photographically. There are other ways of finding fingerprints, but finger mark in blood, certainly blood that may still be wet, photography is the best option. It's not just a question of taking a photograph. You need to maximise what you've got there. You need to make sure that you get the best possible image so that it can be searched to see if you can identify somebody. Sometimes you'd use chemicals for doing that. Sometimes you can do it using light, be that with lasers, ultraviolet light, or any different number of light sources. But that enables that image to get taken away from the scene straight away and taken to a fingerprint bureau where they can carry out those urgent searches 24/7.
Metropolitan Police Fingerprint Bureau expert Chris Caddis was brought in to try to find a match.
Finger marks in blood could be highly evidential if they are part of the scene, which is the assumption that's made by the investigators. It could be the victims, it could be the perpetrators, or it could be someone who intervened. Sometimes when you receive a finger mark, you are able to tell which hand it belongs to as a finger. In this case, the finger mark was only a tip of a finger. It was the tip of the right thumb, but there were enough characteristics to enable a comparison.
But without a suspect, that comparison couldn't be made. So investigators' next step was to run the image of the print through the National Fingerprint Database.
The National Fingerprint Database is a collection of fingerprints taken in custody of people that have been convicted. Each case is approached differently with a strategy. So if you have suspects, a direct comparison can be made against the crime scene marks. If there's an unknown perpetrator, then the database is used if the mark is suitable for that search. When it was initially searched in the database, no matches were made, no identifications were made. And this is not uncommon because marks deposited in blood can be more challenging as the finger marks can be distorted, have different deposition pressure, have superimposition, background information, contaminants. This makes it challenging for a computer system to interpret and compare. A human examiner always has to make the comparison and give an opinion on whether it is made by the same source.
In this case, there wasn't that match against the database, but you don't know at this stage whether it's because the mark isn't of good enough quality or the fact that the fingerprints belonging to the suspect may not be on the database. Perhaps he's never come to the notice of police before.
With a potentially useful fingerprint, but no match on the national database, investigators would need to explore other avenues for a breakthrough.
What struck me immediately was that this is an incredibly busy road for somewhere that is residential. Constant flow of traffic, cars, buses, bikes. And a weird thing that I noticed was that there was a lot of CCTV around and a lot of doorbell cameras on the homes of those that lived along that road.
It was one of those doorbell cameras which recorded the attack on Zara in its entirety and in disturbing detail.
We had grainy image of the actual offence itself. It was captured from a house CCTV. It gave us what had happened and the time it had happened, and we could work out from constant viewing of it that there was a very violent assault going on. It wasn't clear. There was nothing quick around this. This was sustained over a period of time. And you also realise the brutality of the assault inflicted on Zara. There is some form of sexual element in this. He is removing parts of her clothing, and at the same time he is hitting her, he's stamping on her, he's punching her. And then he will break off. He'll break off this attack and he'll walk out of the front garden, he'll start to walk down Cranbrook Road again, and then he'll stop and he'll come back and he'll carry on the assault. You don't know, nothing's disturbed him as such. You don't know why he comes back, but he comes back and he's then assaulting her again before he finally leaves her. He's not in any fear that someone's watching him. He's just completely oblivious to everything else around him, like nothing else matters. And he's totally fixated with her. Viewing what we viewed, you're thinking, this is one dangerous individual and he needs to be arrested as soon as possible.
June 2022. Zara Elena had been found in the early hours of a Sunday morning on a normal residential street in Ilford, East London. She had been beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted. Zara later died from her injuries. Detective Chief Inspector Dave Wellams of the Metropolitan Police was the senior investigating officer tasked with finding Zara's killer. A private security camera had captured the attack itself. Now Dave's team needed to access other CCTV to track the killer's movements before and after it.
Initially, when we go out on CCTV, we're doing everything fast time. You're probably talking about 3 or 4 officers. They will see if the cameras are operating for a start off, seeing if they're recording the next thing, and if they are, then we will view them in situ. And you know the time of the offence, so you can work backwards and forwards to see where the suspect goes. And they will form a direction of travel. They will fast time view that, and then they will look for other cameras along the road that would give another image, and they will just keep backtracking and backtracking and backtracking. Cranbrook Road is a long road. It's several miles, I think, in distance. It leads into Ilford town centre. But our job will be to identify all CCTV points along that road.
The video surveillance team were looking for one person in all the footage from all the cameras they accessed. The same one who'd been filmed attacking Zara.
We really want the first point where he meets Zara. Is it a chance meeting? Has he seen her before? Is it somebody that he has met earlier in the evening? We're all trying to eliminate all of these type of things, but that takes time, and that isn't fast time. That is working to get yourself a best image of your suspect so that you can put it out there to your other officers for identification purposes. And that viewing has to be really detailed, because you miss something, it could be vital. You miss turning down a road, you miss going through a park, you miss crossing a road, and all of a sudden you've got a void of evidence.
Further analysis of footage from CCTV cameras in the vicinity of the attack and the surrounding area revealed more details about the killer and his movements earlier that night.
He is in a pub and he's in a t-shirt. And what strikes you immediately is that he's incredibly intoxicated.
We can also see in his condition getting worse as he gets on, and it looks like we can see drug taking. He became a nuisance to bar staff in there. Some of the girls getting nervous around him, and he eventually is asked to leave.
CCTV picked up chilling footage of the suspect stalking multiple women over a prolonged period of time in those early hours of Sunday morning.
Zara wasn't the first person that night that attracted his attention, and it was quite clear that he formed the intent very early on in that evening that he was going to have some type of interaction with a female, and he didn't care who that female was.
He was walking around Ilford town centre, heavily intoxicated, stalking multiple women for hours. And very quickly he starts to pick on different women to follow, out of the blue, and for no apparent reason. And one woman he follows for 21 minutes. Some of the women notice that he's following them, and some of them don't. Very quickly he picks on one woman who's on her phone, and he follows her from the train station as she appears to be walking home. He's stumbling around. The woman notices and she runs into a greengrocer's. She even bumps into him in the supermarket and looks visibly alarmed because she's wondering why a stranger is following her. He exits that supermarket and, probably most chilling of all, waits round the corner. As that woman exits the supermarket and continues on her journey home, talking on the phone at some points, he starts to follow her. The next time they're picked up on CCTV footage, the woman is running away. He was striding determinedly behind her. We understand this woman managed to slip down a side street and managed to get away.
After 2 more unsuccessful attempts, one at a chicken shop on Romford Road and the other outside Aston Community Centre, the suspect returns onto Cranbrook Road.
He then goes back into Cranbrook Road and picks up with another woman, and he follows her for a considerable distance, and he's getting closer and closer and closer. And it's quite noticeable. One point that we can view on the CCTV is that there are 2 lads on the opposite side of the carriageway to him, and they start to walk across the road, and their gaze is taken by him. They stop in the middle of the road, and they just look at him as he's gone past, and they are clearly thinking something's not quite right. They end up by walking away. He continues following this lady. They turn off down a side road, and he gets ahead of her, and he hides. We see him hide in a passageway between 2 houses, and then he's obviously watching, and we see the girl in the yellow jacket, and she ends up going into her address. He obviously doesn't know that she lives there. He goes into her address, he comes out, sees what's happened, and he heads off again. And it's at that point where he heads off to rejoin Cranbrook Road that he picks up with Zara.
Shortly after 2 a.m, following several of these failed attempts to get close to other lone women, CCTV cameras finally pick up an image of both the attacker and Zara as their paths crossed at the corner of Cranbrook and Northbrook Road.
He's walking at this point down Cranbrook Road when he reaches a crossroads. And it's at that point, clearly thinks he's found his next person to pursue. It's not clear at what point Zara knew that he was following her, if she knew at all. But he is walking with purpose. His intention has been building, and as has his frustration.
Zara was walking along Cranbrook Road in this direction towards us. He then came out of Northbrook Road and saw Zara and immediately fell in behind her and started following her. And he followed her all the way along this road, past us, and continued going along that direction towards Gants Hill. As he follows her close by, he gains on her until he gets into very close proximity to her, and then he just arms around her neck area and drags her down and drags her into the front garden of a residential house.
You watch this footage with dread, and the footage is grainy, but what you can tell and what comes across is the brutality and the sheer force of this attack. It was vicious, It was unrelenting. He stomped on her. He kicked her body numerous times, including her face. He sexually assaulted her. He broke so many of her bones and left her bleeding. And he walked so calmly away from the scene.
But having such clear images of both the attack and the perpetrator wasn't enough. Detective Chief Inspector Dave Wellams and his team now faced the challenge of identifying who he might be.
We did get some good images of the person we were looking for. Once you have that image, that is the focus of your investigation. Who's best then placed to identify that image? Well, I believe local officers. So that image was sent through to local officers that were on duty, and gradually we had some officers put forward possible identifications for this suspect.
This was an investigation moving fast, and the breakthrough came just one day after Zara died.
Everything was happening at a very frenetic pace that morning, early afternoon. And one of my detectives came running into my office and see me and said, Governor, I think this guy we're after is a guy called Jordan McSweeney. So I said, okay, why do you say that? And she says, well, an officer from the local borough has looked at the image, believes it's the same guy that he dealt with sometime previously. He's interviewed him. He's quite sure. And I've done some checking on our intelligence indices, and he's recently come out of prison.
This would mean that the fingerprints of this offender, Jordan McSweeney, would already be stored on the National Fingerprint Database. Chris Caddis was tasked with finding out if they matched the print left in Zara's blood at the scene of her murder.
A fingerprint examiner will follow a scientific methodology for a comparison, and this is the ACE process. They will analyse the mark from the crime scene, they will analyse the prints, they will make a comparison of those two impressions, and then come up with an evaluation and outcome. They are looking at friction-ridged skin. This is the skin that you find on your hands and feet. The ridges on these areas of skin deviate. Everyone has these in variation, and this is what makes fingerprints unique. So the examiner's job is to compare areas of friction-ridged skin, either from crime scenes or prints taken in custody, analyse those to see if they come from the same person. In the comparison of this finger mark against the prints, I was able to find a coincidence sequence of 26 characteristics. These are all a configuration unique to the prints, and both impressions were made by the same person. The verifier confirmed this outcome, and from that stage, that becomes an official identification for Jordan McSweeney.
One of my officers comes running in and says, we've just had a direct hit. It's Jordan McSweeney. They've done a one-to-one comparison and it's Jordan McSweeney all day long. So straight away then there's that impetus then for the investigation. Who, where, why is Jordan McSweeney? Where is he?
With a positive fingerprint match, detectives were now on the hunt to find Jordan McSweeney before he had the chance to attack again. In June 2022, police in Ilford, East London, were investigating the murder of a 35-year-old woman who'd been sexually assaulted, beaten and strangled to death on a residential street while making her way home. CCTV footage, as well as a bloody fingerprint left at the murder scene, had helped detectives identify a possible suspect. That man was Jordan McSweeney. Now DCI Dave Wellams and his team had to find him.
Jordan McSweeney is identified. I know that he's come out from prison very, very recently, within a week or so. The offence that he was in custody for was the possession of an offensive weapon. He got a substantial sentence for that, and then was released out. And I also know that he's not obeying his conditions of release. He's not contacting the probation service. Where's he been released to? My first question. The answer comes back, well, there's no real address for him as such. It's relatives, but they've not seen him. Is he contactable? Or they tried to contact him? He has not got a phone. Where's he living? We just don't know.
CCTV had shown McSweeney's movements leading up to the attack and the attack itself. Could it now be used to find out where he went after it?
We are still continuing to backtrack him. He's left the scene, he's walking back down Cranbrook Road, and he's heading towards Valentine's Park. And that then leads us on to the next piece of the investigation, because we see him leap over a fence and disappear into the park. We then track him again, CCTV again, and he heads into the park before we actually lose him, but he's heading in the direction of a fairground.
And there were more clues to be gleaned from the images.
You look at the individual concerned, you look at what he is like, his demeanour, his physical being, you form certain opinions. Me looking at it, and it's a hunch as such. You're thinking, this strikes me as a manual worker. He looks like he works physically with hands type of thing, the build of him. It's a distinct possibility he could be a fairground worker. We identify the owner of the fairground, and I asked one of my officers to go down, see him, and to show him the photograph and see if he knows who that could possibly be. This officer went down there, he found the gentleman and his wife, and he showed the pair of them the photograph. And they said, that's Jordan McSweeney. He said, you know him? He said, yes, we know him. He said, you wouldn't happen to know where he is, would you? And one of them said, yes, he's in that caravan over there.
With this news, arrest units had to be quickly mobilised.
With that, there's a mad scramble goes up. Our proactive units that we have are alerted, and they set off straight away to Valentine's Park. The area around the caravan is being contained, and they just open the caravan door to see the two males still in bed, and they enter. There's no, it's not me, what you're talking about, resistance, aggression or anything like that. He's handcuffed and he's led out and placed in police for transport.
Jordan McSweeney, you're under arrest for rape and murder of a female at Cranbrook Road on the 26th of June 2022 in the early hours of the morning. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand?
29-year-old Jordan McSweeney was taken into custody for police questioning, and the news was released to local and national news agencies.
The police revealed that they'd arrested a suspect over 24 hours after this incident happened, which immediately in the newsroom we started thinking, that's incredibly quick. And early indications were at that stage that this was not a man that knew Zara, and this appeared to be a random attack. We then started to discover that this was a man that had already been known to police. he was a prolific offender. He had over 20 convictions for over 60 offences. Petty theft, assault, racial harassment, a litany of convictions. He was an incredibly violent individual.
Again, closed-circuit TV footage matched the forensic findings which detectives secured from the caravan McSweeney was staying in.
In CCTV footage, the morning after, McSweeney is seen stashing a bag underneath another static caravan, and he's seen wandering around the funfair. Inside that bag, we now know, were items of his clothing that were stained with Zara's blood. And within the caravan that he was staying, we know that police officers also found evidence of Zara's DNA.
It's not just a question of grabbing that bag and taking it back to the police station. Everything has to be done in a careful manner. You need to make sure that you're not going to contaminate it yourself. Does it require a completely separate team of people to carry out that examination? Because if they've dealt with the primary scene where Zara's blood is, you need to make sure that then there's no chance that they're going to transfer anything from that scene onto that clothing, because that's what you're trying to prove scientifically.
We had a huge amount of forensic evidence. We have his trainers, Zara's blood all over them. The jeans showed a distribution of blood splatter. The lower legs, that was all of Zara's. The vest had blood on Zara's. The bedding, Zara's blood. So there was a wealth of forensic evidence.
It did appear to be incredibly lazy, almost as though he didn't think that his name would be attached to it, or almost as though he didn't think that anyone would bother finding her, and therefore no one would ever attach his name to the crime.
On the 18th of November 2022, Jordan McSweeney pled guilty to the murder of Zara Alina. With a trial no longer required, all that was left was for McSweeney to be sentenced. But even in that, he showed complete disregard for Zara and her loved ones.
The day of the sentencing, the courtroom was packed out. Journalists, barristers, solicitors, both the defence and prosecution, also family. Jordan McSweeney refused to be present during his sentencing. And it meant that the family had no opportunity to look him in the eye. They had no opportunity to see what this attacker looked like, to even start to process their closure, start to heal from it. He wouldn't even give them that. I think the judge on that day described him as spineless.
On the 14th of December 2022, Jordan McSweeney was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 38 years. He never faced Zara's family and never gave them any explanation as to why he did what he did to this bright, intelligent, compassionate woman with so much ahead of her.
Zara was the light, the warmth, the bird song, the laughter in our family. We live with a profound loss each day, and each day we are destroyed a little more.
The forensics in this case were crucial, but it's one of those examples where the forensics worked hand in hand with traditional policing. That's the important thing here, that it shows that there's a balance between the two. On its own, the forensics may have got there, the traditional policing may have got there, but put them together and you end up with a much stronger result much quickly.
This attack was senseless. Zara was the sort of woman, her family said, that was always fighting for justice and for women, and she believed that women should be allowed to walk home alone. She believed that we were allowed to feel safe on the streets of Britain. this was a horrific incident where he didn't allow her to make it to her front door on the streets that she grew up on. It's every woman's worst fear. And that's really sad.
In every murder, there are clues. Vital evidence that points to who the killer is and how they killed.
It wasn't a normal crime scene.
Forensics were crucial.
Every contact leaves a trace.
It's down to detectives, crime scene investigators, and forensic experts to piece those clues together.
It's like trying to do a jigsaw when you haven't got the picture on the box.
Using cutting-edge techniques and the power of science.
His jeans had the profile of the crime scene on them. I know that he had knelt down on the soil.
To convict the killers.
We've got to find him and catch him. He's probably the most dangerous person I've prosecuted.
And bring justice to the victims.
She's never, ever coming home. She'll never be forgotten, ever.
In this episode, a woman's body is found in a woodland beauty spot.
I just knew it was Karen, and I remember just falling on the floor. I couldn't take note of anything.
A quiet village is shaken to its core.
This sent terror through this community. People were scared.
Detectives on the hunt for a vicious murderer, but short of clues.
We had no DNA, we had no fingerprints, we had no witnesses. Where would we get our evidence from to prove who'd done that murder?
This is Forensics, Catching the Killer.
This area is a little village within Denton in Greater Manchester called Horton Green. The area where the woodland is, it was commonly known or locally known as Bluebell Wood or Gibraltar Wood, and was a bit of a local beauty spot where you got dog walkers, people just enjoying going for a walk. This is the crime scene. This is where Karen's body was located on that Saturday morning. She was found at 8:30 a.m. by a man walking his dog. Karen's body was lying here when it was found. Her feet pointing in this direction, her head in that direction. She was facing away from us. Her handbag and contents had been turned out upside down and emptied onto the ground here. Over here was a jacket, which obviously were recovered. Karen was in a bad way. Her clothing had been partially removed. Her blouse had been torn off and stuffed into her mouth, and she had a lot of stamp marks on her face. Her bra had been wrapped tightly around her neck and she'd been strangled.
In April 2002, Detective Chief Inspector Tony Cook was appointed Senior Investigating Officer on the Karen Doubleday murder case. His job, to trace the killer of the 41-year-old shop assistant.
One of the things we do at an early stage, or what we call lines of inquiry. One of the lines of inquiry is what we call victimology. So that, in effect, means we are looking into all the background details of the victim. We have a famous saying, if you find out how a person lived, you will find out how they died.
Matt O'Donoghue was a radio reporter based in the Northwest.
As a journalist, in the immediate aftermath, when something as horrific as this happens, you go from door to door, talking to people, trying to build up a picture of who Karen was. And there wasn't anybody who had a bad word to say about her. She was a single mother. She'd moved back in with her parents, and she was absolutely dedicated to her family and to her teenage son. She worked not far away in the greengrocers selling fruit and veg. And by all accounts, according to everybody that we spoke to, she was popular, she was cheery, she was outgoing, she was fun-loving. She'd been on a night out with friends, police told us, and that was the immediate thing, to use us, the media, for a witness appeal. And we put out a phone number, which was the instant room, and that would be the cue to call, to get in touch with the officers as they gathered every single piece of evidence that they could to put those final hours and minutes together so they could build up a picture of what exactly had happened to Karen.
Friends and family helped detectives to understand more about who Karen was and the life she lived. Joanne Kirkland had been a close friend for over a decade.
I met Karen through our sons. Karen's son Michael, my son Dominic, were in infant school together, and they become good friends at school. Karen lived with her a mum, a dad, and Michael, her son, just up the road from me, not very far away. She lived there her whole life with them. She never moved out. She always lived with mum and dad, and Michael always lived with mum and dad as well. Karen was just amazing, inspirational. She was always somebody that you could depend on. I could ring her at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and she'd pick her phone up and just listen to me, you know, and she was just an amazing, amazing friend. We spoke every single day, sometimes a couple of times a day on the phone we spoke. On the Saturday morning, it was quite early, my mum rung me and she said that there was all police on Manor Road at the top. It had all been cordoned off. She said somebody's saying that they found a body. So I immediately rung Karen's mum. Well, actually, just to speak to Karen to say what's going on, because it was near Karen's house. And her mum said that she hadn't come home. And I knew that the minute Karen's mum said that, I just knew it was Karen. Because there's just no way she would not have gone home, and there's no way if she had been staying out, you know, she should have told mum and dad that she was, you know, she weren't coming home, she was staying out that night. But I just knew.
The terrible truth was confirmed all too soon.
Karen's mum rung and she spoke to my mum, and my mum just went white. And I said to her, "It's definitely Karen, isn't it?" And my mum said, "Yeah." And I remember just falling on the floor and my dad picking me up. And I couldn't take note of anything. During the day, you can pretend it's not real. You can hope it's not real. But then as soon as that, you know, it's real, isn't it? And you just have to deal with it then.
police needed to establish the nature of the attack on Karen.
The interesting feature is the geography of the location. It's a wooded area, but it's the entrance to the woods. It's not in the woods. So whoever committed the attack has done it in a bit of a conspicuous place. They could have gone to more lengths to conceal the body, to hide it. So it's happened quickly. What's happened has happened pretty quickly, and she's just been left. Although, importantly, it looks like there's been an element of staging as well, because it's been made to look like a robbery or a sex attack gone wrong. She'd been strangled using her own bra from behind. Whoever committed the attack had not come prepared. They didn't bring a weapon with them. It seemed to be spontaneous. They ended up improvising. It all seemed to have the hallmarks of an attack that had been spontaneous and not pre-planned.
The focus would now be on the forensic teams. What could they reveal about the killer of Karen Doubleday? April 2002, and the body of 41-year-old Karen Doubleday had been found in woodland in Manchester's leafy eastern fringe. She'd suffered a savage beating and was then strangled. Karen was just yards from her home.
Horton Green, where Karen lived, is on the outskirts of Greater Manchester. It's quite isolated in some respects, in that the back end of the village rolls out into the most gorgeous countryside, which is basically the foothills of the Pennines. It's the sort of place where you would not expect a murder, particularly a murder so brutal, to have taken place. This was a single mother who was much liked, and in an area like this where these sorts of things are not commonplace, this sent terror through this community. People were scared. They were fearful that there was a serial killer at loose, and they were scared that there could be somebody else next.
But hopes the investigation would be over swiftly looked slim.
In the main, you're hoping that you'll get DNA, you'll get fingerprints, you'll get CCTV, you'll get witnesses. In this particular case, we didn't have any of those. We had no DNA, we had no fingerprints, we had no witnesses, we had no CCTV because there wasn't any in that little village. So that became a main challenge. Where would we get our evidence from to prove who'd done that murder? So we build up a timeline of the victim's movements from a very early stage on the day when she was last seen to when the body was found. That might reveal a vital clue as to who came into contact with her and might have done her some harm.
Detectives traced Karen's movements on the day before her body was found.
We established quite quickly that Karen had been out on the Friday night. She'd been to the pub called the Old Dog Inn, which is on the main street of Horton Green, and she'd been with her boyfriend, a gentleman by the name of Adam Hamilton.
Karen told me that she'd met somebody and it was really nice, and you know, she thought it might go somewhere. But then when I was talking to Karen's mum was saying there's just something off. I don't know, I can't put my finger on it, but there's just something off. I actually only met him a couple of times. I just took it that she wanted to keep Adam and family separate. She said she told me he was very controlling. He wanted to know where she was all the time. He'd ring her 10 times a day, you know, constantly ringing her on the phone.
On the Friday night, the day before her body was found, Joanne had spoken to Karen.
She rung me and she said she was going out with Adam, and she'd told me the weekend before that she was going to finish things, but he'd always threatened to cause a scene. She was living with mum and dad as well. She didn't want a scene at their house, you know, with neighbours, and so she kept on seeing him. But she said to me that she was going to stop it that night. I was a bit concerned, and I was just telling her just be careful, and obviously to ring me on the Saturday. And she said, no, I won't ring you. I'll come down and I'll tell you all about it. And that's what we'd arranged to do.
But Karen didn't come to tell her friend about it on the Saturday. In fact, Joanne never saw her again. And after Karen's body had been found, Adam Hamilton didn't seem as concerned as friends and family expected him to be.
Even when we knew it was Karen, he didn't even go and see Karen's mum and dad, ring, nothing at all. He claimed to have loved her and he cared about her an awful lot and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. But that just speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Hamilton was clearly someone the police needed to investigate. What exactly had he and Karen been doing the previous evening?
They'd been in the pub from around about 9 p.m. that night and left round about closing time, 11:15, 11:30 p.m. According to Hamilton, he and Karen had gone into his flat. According to him then, she left him about 1:15 a.m. He followed her to the car park, kissed her goodnight, and she walked off towards her home address on her own. That was the last time he saw her.
Hamilton, who was originally from North Wales, lived in a flat in the centre of Horton Green.
We conducted a lot of inquiries into Adam Hamilton, who he was, did he have any previous convictions, his movements on that night, what was happening in his life, was he violent, had he got any in previous record of attacking females. In this case, we quickly established that Adam Hamilton had a previous conviction. For an attack a number of years ago on a young girl who he'd met in a pub and who'd spurned his advances, and he waited outside and he ended up attacking her and stabbed her with a knife, so which he got a term of imprisonment for. So that was a major piece of information for us, because it showed us that Hamilton had a tendency to be violent.
It painted a disturbing picture, and it was supported by accounts from friends and family.
I was interviewed with the police numerous times. I just told the police, like, the way, you know, that she told me, like, the way that he controlled her, and, you know, the way that she'd wanted to finish things, and he'd said he'd cause a scene if she did, the way she felt uncomfortable with him at times.
I made a very, very early decision, in fact the first day, that Adam Hamilton needs to be made a suspect. He was the last person to see her alive, and he had this previous conviction for an assault on a female. So that was a key decision.
Hamilton was questioned as police searched for more evidence.
We then send a team, plus forensic examiners and experts, to his flat to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to look for any trace evidence and seize any items we think might be useful to the investigation. That would include his clothing, particularly his clothing he wore on the night Karen went missing and was murdered. What we also found out about Adam Hamilton is that he was seeing somebody else as well as Karen. So he was having a relationship with another female, and she bought him a pair of jeans, which became a crucial clue in the investigation. And what was key to that is that this was a brand new pair of jeans. We recovered that brand new pair of jeans that he'd been wearing, he told us he'd been wearing on the night of that Friday night when he'd been out with Karen and was the last person to see her alive. We recovered those forensically, and of significance, there was an obvious dirt stain on one of the knees. Now, we knew that whoever had committed the murder had knelt down behind Karen in order to strangle her. So the knee having a soil stain on it was really significant. Here I am, I've got a pair of jeans with a soil stain on, I've got a crime scene, I've got a suspect, I want to link the three together, but in standard forensic, there wasn't really an expert in soil who could match one bit of soil to another, i.e. match the jeans to the crime scene.
It seemed like this beauty spot could be the key to solving the mystery of who had killed Karen Doubleday. What was needed was a forensic expert who could reveal its secrets. April 2002. And 41-year-old single mum Karen Doubleday had been murdered. Her body had been found in woodland in Greater Manchester. She'd been brutally beaten and strangled. Now, just 3 days since her murder, police already had a suspect.
It was very, very quickly, within just a few days, that police were saying that her killer was known to her. When the cameras and the microphones went off, we were told that they had a prime suspect, that it was somebody close to Karen, and that they had arrested him within a matter of days of this happening. And that man was Adam Hamilton.
But with no obvious evidence linking him to Karen's death, police couldn't hold Hamilton for long, even though he had a history of violence.
We got the news that he hadn't been charged and that he'd been released on bail. And it was frustrating for that community to know that the man who was the last person to see Karen alive, to know that this person who was effectively the police prime suspect was back out on their streets. This dangerous man was back walking amongst them.
And that was particularly painful for Karen's friends and family. They not only believed he'd murdered her, they felt Hamilton had dishonoured Karen too.
It was the way she was found, you know, just degraded her really, you know. We could have covered her up or something, so whoever found her didn't have to see her like that. She'd have hated that, she would have hated that.
With no direct eyewitness evidence, forensics would need to play a crucial role in investigating Karen's murder.
One of the problems we had with Hamilton as a suspect is that we needed to try and place him at the crime scene. He'd said to us in a very early interview we had with him that he had not been in those woods. That was a significant statement he made.
Police believed a soil stain on the knee of a brand new pair of jeans Hamilton had been wearing on the night Karen was killed could disprove his story. Detectives had deduced the killer had knelt behind Karen when she was murdered. But could the soil stain be matched to Gibraltar wood?
We were recommended a lady called Pat Wiltshire.
Pat Wiltshire is one of the world's leading experts in linking botanical samples to the scene of a crime. She travelled to Horton Green to visit Gibraltar Wood.
I was quite surprised because it was very open, and normally bodies are hidden or there's some attempt to hide them. There was no attempt to hide this. Very, very exposed, sprawled across a very open part of an entrance to a woodland.
In the laboratory, soil samples from the crime scene were broken down to leave the pollen spores, which should reflect the visual survey of plants. But to be more than a generic comparison, it helps if the samples have unusual distinctive characteristics.
These are just comparison samples. They're to compare with what's on the perpetrator or on the victim. It's got to be similar to the exhibit, but it's always important, if you can get them, to have special markers. And in this particular case, there were some special markers.
The soil at the location where Karen's body was found did have distinctive characteristics. The special markers Patricia Wiltshire was hoping for. Something called pre-quaternary spores.
These are from ferns that were living well before the last ice age, and they were growing on soils. Well, those soils eventually became compacted, formed rock. That rock, once the ice age had been and gone, come and gone, the rock that's underneath gradually weathered away, releasing those spores again. So they end up back in the soil, and they're not part of the vegetation, but they're there, and they're a brilliant marker.
These fern spores from thousands of years ago helped establish what was effectively a pollen and spore fingerprint of the crime scene. But Patricia Wiltshire's work involved weeks of detailed forensic analysis before her sample could be compared with the genes.
It appeared from the surface, from an outsider's perspective, that the investigation effectively had gone cold.
Tony Cook, it was just amazing. He was explaining everything to us, that they had to get everything together, and he said it was like a jigsaw. We've got all these different pieces and we've got to make sure that they all come together correctly, because if we don't and we miss something, people could walk because of that. And he just kept saying, we will get there. It's just going to take us some time. But as family, you don't understand that. You just want them arrested there and you want them in prison straight away because it's them.
It wasn't just the crime scene soil samples that Patricia Wiltshire was investigating. Her expertise backed the police in their more conventional inquiries. Hamilton said he'd kissed Karen goodnight the last time he saw her, and that they parted amicably. Detectives, though, had their doubts.
The route that she would have walked home, we did house-to-house inquiries along there. And we found a couple who said they heard a couple arguing around about 1:15 a.m. It corroborated a theory that they'd been arguing en route to the place where Karen was murdered.
That argument had been heard in the car park of the Old Dog pub.
Hamilton actually said he walked to that car park, so a theory we had was whether the argument started there. Karen also had a bloodstain on her sleeve, so he could have struck her there, dabbed her nose.
Could nature now provide forensic evidence to refute Hamilton's account?
The Forensic Science Service had reported that they got a peculiar yellow-greenish stain on the jacket of the victim. When I looked at what was in their samples, it was forsythia pollen.
And Patricia discovered another telling piece of evidence on Hamilton's footwear.
By this time, I had analysed the suspect's shoes and boots. I was really perturbed because one shoe had an enormous amount of dandelion pollen on it. The other shoe had only a tiny amount of it, and I thought, that's weird. But the victim's right shoulder had all this forsythia pollen on it. When we went to the pub yard, it was eureka. because there was a little tiny verge right up against a concrete slabby walls. And over the wall, there was a forsythia bush. And when I looked at the verge, it's only about that wide, about a foot wide, full of dandelions. So it looked to me, if you try and reconstruct the scenario, he'd trodden on this little verge with his left foot, and she had bumped up against the wall with her right shoulder, and it fitted.
Tony Cook's deduction that what had happened in the car park was a violent encounter and not a peaceful farewell was now backed by forensic science.
The theory was they'd had an argument, he'd hit her, she'd dabbed her nose, and she'd gone against the wall where all this forsythia was, which has also gone in her coat.
It was just a neat thing to corroborate. The victim and the suspect had been in that pub yard.
Patricia Wiltshire's ingenious forensic work was helping to put the jigsaw pieces of the police case into place. And another expert was conducting a parallel analysis too, this time on the injuries inflicted during the brutal attack on Karen.
She'd been stamped on a number of times. Whoever had killed her had also stamped on her face. When we did the post-mortem on Karen, there was an interesting mark on her face, which was photographed. So we started to collect a lot of footwear from not just Hamilton, but any other person of interest, to see if we could match it up to the mark.
Derek Tremaine, who worked at the National Injuries Database, Bramshill Police College, was asked to look at the case.
The bulk of my work is weapon and wound overlay, which is basically to compare weapons with injuries. So therefore, if you got a mark on skin, I would overlay the weapon, perhaps a shoe or something like a tool or something, to compare to see if that weapon made that mark. I came across a photograph of Karen on her side showing her left cheek. On that, I could see a mark on her face. It was an inverted bucket-shaped mark, which to me looked like probably something from the sole of a shoe. I contacted Tony Cook and said, I've got looks like a mark here. So he said, I'll send you the shoes down.
Detectives had been collecting shoes from all potential suspects, including Adam Hamilton. Could footwear forensic analysis prove that he was the killer? Mum of one, Karen Doubleday, had been murdered in Gibraltar Wood in the village of Horton Green in Greater Manchester. She'd been viciously beaten and then strangled. World-renowned forensic paleontologist Patricia Wiltshire had been brought in to work on the case.
My function is when they get someone, has he been to that place or has she been to that place? And that's what I want to focus on.
Patricia's painstaking work had established a pollen and spore fingerprint of the soil where Karen's body had been found. The next step was to compare it to a soil stain on the brand new pair of jeans belonging to the prime suspect, Karen's boyfriend, Adam Hamilton. The tests were positive.
His jeans had the profile of the crime scene on them. Not only that, I know that he had knelt down on the soil, because the profile of the soil, and the genes were so similar. But don't forget, legs are three-dimensional, and he'd bumped into vegetation as well. So I got other things from other parts of the legs.
That was a eureka moment. She said she could match the soil on the jeans to the crime scene. What a fantastic outcome that was. And a big piece of evidence, a big piece of the jigsaw had been put into place.
Hamilton's claim that he'd never visited the crime scene had been exposed as a lie. And Patricia Wiltshire had also confirmed that Gibraltar Wood was where Karen Doubleday had been murdered. It wasn't just where her body had been left.
They had retrieved grass and soil from her mouth. I looked at the grass, I extracted the pollen that was on the grass, and it matched the profile. It was from that place. So we could see that her mouth had actually been in the soil. Her face had been in the soil, and the material was in her mouth. How would she get that soil from that place unless her mouth had been on the ground and open? Was that during the attack? She would never do that willingly. Who would chew soil from the ground?
But police still needed direct evidence linking Hamilton to the actual attack on Karen. Derek Tremaine of the National Injuries Database was their main hope. Could he match Hamilton's footwear to Karen's facial injuries?
Tony Cook sent me down a load of shoes. A lot of them, I excluded them visually. But there was one of interest, which was quite a heavy shoe, which had a sort of a diamond shape on its heel. I scanned that in to a computer, then overlaid that image onto the image of the injury on Karen. And it fitted perfectly.
But there was a problem. The forensic scale usually included on scene of crime pictures was missing from the shot of Karen's face.
Any self-respecting barrister in court would say you made it fit. So therefore we had to find some way of getting a scale onto the picture. Karen was strangled with an item of clothing which was used as a ligature, and over that was a silver chain which was pulled fairly tight, and on the end was a pendant. So I then went to the police and said to them, have you still got that chain? They said yes. I said, can you photograph that with a scale, please? Then what I did, I used the scale image of the chain, which I superimposed on the item of clothing on Karen's neck, and when the links of the chain were the same size, I knew that that scale was the right size to put onto the picture. Once I had a scale on the scene photograph of Karen, I could then do an overlay, and it fitted perfectly. Now I had a link to that shoe.
Derek told me he thought he'd found a match with the mark on Karen's face and some footwear that we'd submitted to him for examination. And of course he said the match was an exact match and the footwear belonged to Adam Hamilton. So that was a major breakthrough for us and a defining moment in the investigation.
The footwear linked Hamilton directly to Karen's injuries. It was the final piece in the complicated jigsaw Tony Cook had been trying to put together.
We had the fact that he was the last person to see her alive. We had the fact that he told us he'd never been to the scene of Gibraltar Wood, and we can prove that he had been with the evidence from Patricia Wiltshire. His story just did not stack up. Pieced together, all this evidence gave us a prosecution case, which we were happy to take to court.
We got the news that A 37-year-old man had been arrested in Anglesey, a small island off North Wales. And we knew that this was the childhood home of Adam Hamilton. And it had got too hot for him to live in that community. You know, the finger of suspicion was too much for him to stay there, and like the coward that he was, he'd run away, run back to his tiny island, and that was where police picked him up.
Hamilton was put on trial for Karen's murder at Manchester Crown Court in January 2004.
He was a coward. He put the family through the trauma of hearing in minute detail what had happened to her. He'd gone not guilty. He forced them to listen to that.
We were sat on the family area, and he was in a box in like the middle of the courtroom, really. And he never looked at us once. He just sat staring straight ahead the whole time. There was just no emotion on his face, even when the experts was talking about how she was found and how she died, and there was just nothing. There was no emotion. There was just nothing on his face. He just sat the whole time, facing forward.
With no eyewitnesses, the forensic evidence would be vital for the prosecution case.
I was in the witness box for 5 days altogether. We tried to plug all the holes in the case before it went to court. The defence might ask this, therefore I need to check that. The defence might ask that, I must check this. Because you can predict what the barristers are going to say. And so you try and preempt them, we did that quite well.
But as the trial ended, had it been enough?
The pressure is just unbelievable. You can't breathe. It's just the emotions you're going through, and you're thinking, please, please, please find guilty. And they stood up and they said guilty, and we just like burst out crying, and the mum started crying, but there was no emotion off him.
Hamilton was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 15 years before he could apply for parole. To date, he is still in prison.
If it wasn't for the experts, if it wasn't for Pat, if it wasn't for Derek, there is no doubt that police would have had to have left Adam Hamilton free, and who knows what he would have done then, emboldened by the fact that effectively he committed murder and he got away with it. Forensics in this case were absolutely crucial.
There were a lot of doubters at the time, a lot, but we hung on him there, and I'm glad we put our faith in Pat Wiltshire and Derek Tremaine, because they came through at the end and did exactly what we asked them to do.
But the guilty verdict is little compensation for losing a mother, daughter, and a friend.
It's just wrecked so many lives. A friend, a son, a mum and dad, a family, everybody's lives is just wrecked. And we've got no answers for that on why did he do what he did? There's lots of things happening at the moment that I just want her to be involved in. And she's not. And we went to get my wedding dress last year, and I got quite upset with planning the wedding and things, because I thought she should be here with us, you know, planning it with us. I've had a picture of her as well sewn into my dress. So she's still going to be there, even if she's not there in person. She's just left a huge hole that will never, ever, ever be filled, ever. She'll never be forgotten, ever. Never. She gave us too much to remember, to forget.